honor to be here with all of you to say a few words about my mentor and teacher, dear friend, my spiritual father, Marshall Meyer, whom I met when I was 6 years old. I was born in Argentina, as you heard, of a Syrian Jewish family, and my family sort of migrated to the synagogue of this young man who was, at the time, he was an American. Came to Argentina when he was 29 years old. He had finished his studies at the Jewish Theological Seminary, almost across the street, and he was a student and devotee all his life of Rabbi Joshua Heschel. He revered Heschel, admired, revered, translated his books into Spanish, taught him every day of his life, and he was committed to Heschel's vision of prayer and spirituality and social justice and interfaith cooperation, all the things that Heschel really, that many of you know. Marshall Meyer tried to operationalize in his life and sort of embody in the work that he did in his community. I grew up in that community. And then I became his student, and I had the great fortune to, when he returned after 25 years in Argentina to the US and to New York, I had the great fortune of working with him for 7.5 years at the Jeshurun, where I am now. And I hope I am doing him justice by trying to continue his vision and his work. So when he was in Argentina, Rabbi Meyer founded a wonderful synagogue, very dynamic, that contained all these ingredients: prayer and justice work and interfaith cooperation. And he was always, there were always people from all faiths coming in and out and having dialogue groups. And eventually things in Argentina got to a very dangerous place. The country was run, as of 1976, by a murderous, fascist, Nazi-leaning military junta. And people started being persecuted, disappearing, tortured, murdered. It was a very terrible time. And there was a group of activists, many of them religious people, Catholics and Protestants and Jews particularly. The Muslim community was at the time a tiny community. Now it's, thank God, a more expanded community with a greater presence. And at the time, this group of people, together with a number of civic leaders and former politicians, organized an underground assembly called the Permanent Assembly for Human Rights. And they tried to rescue people from being kidnapped. They tried to rescue people from who were already detained and whisk them out of the country. And in some cases they succeeded, in other cases they didn't. My teacher, Marshall Meyer, would visit people in jail, Christians and Jews, regardless of their faith. He would go and visit them, and he endangered his life and the life of his family. And every Friday night at the synagogue, there were hundreds of people, maybe over 1,000 people. Many of those people came to hear from him. Many of them were not Jews. They came to hear from him what was going on, because you couldn't get, the news did not carry what was really happening in the country. And so they, with great courage, he would tell people what was going on. And he would denounce over and over again the government. And we knew also that there were people in the congregation that were government agents. And thank God his life, he didn't pay with his life for his great courage and heroism. And then he came here after democracy was restored. There was an investigation done over a number of years of the human rights abuses. There's a report that was issued, and that documented the terrible things that had happened and that most people either didn't know or didn't want to know about, that was sort of covered up. And then he came here and he took this congregation on 88th Street, the Jeshurun. I had the fortune to work with him and to help him raise this congregation from spiritual and financial bankruptcy, and to bring it back into life. And thank God we had the chance to do that. So I want to conclude by reading, and he was, when he came here, was also deeply committed to interfaith work. So that's how we ended up in connection with Dean Morton and other great leaders. We were talking with Peter before about Bill Weber and Howard Moody and Bishop Paul Moore and people of that caliber. And that was a really important place for him to reflect and to get more clarity and vision. It was done in the company of such people from other faiths. So I want to just read to you a small piece that he wrote. I mean, part of a larger piece, but it says, by speaking out publicly against the actions of the government, I knew that I was placing my life and the life of my family in jeopardy. On the other hand, I felt that I would be putting my soul in jeopardy if I stood silent. When I was in Argentina, I didn't take positions because of a specific political persuasion, but rather my activism emanated from the wellsprings of my own Judaism. If one was to take the Bible seriously, I believed, you just couldn't watch these things happen and maintain silence. Not if you're a believing Christian or a believing Jew. It was part and parcel of my own Judaism. I just couldn't shut up, especially after knowing what had happened in Europe in the Holocaust years. I believe that I, as a rabbi, could not forgive myself if I repeated the silence of the rabbis of Europe in the 1930s. The enemies of peace and justice always rely on fear and on the silence of the population. I read this sentence over and over again. The enemies of peace and justice always rely on fear and on silence of the population. In Argentina today, there are too many forces trying to block out the light of hope for a tomorrow of peace and creativity. Every one of us has the holy obligation to keep alive at least a small spark of this light. Thank you, and I hope it's a productive day and that we all move further into light and into justice.
Yes.